Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm your host today, and we're back just a few days after the last podcast, of course. We recorded on Friday afternoon with me and Tyrone Marshall. We've got another colleague today after his return of his holiday, Samuel Luckhurst. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's like couples therapy here for myself and Tyrone.
Is everything okay between you?
I've got a lot to get off my chest. How long have we got this room booked for?
Hopefully you don't end in divorce by the end of this podcast, you two. We'll bring you both back together after Samuel's time away. Samuel, where's your tan? You've not got a tan?
No, there was no holiday. There were a couple of personal commitments, but the closest I got to tan was Blackpool. I had a day at Blackpool. We're having some beach football when the weather was good. So, yeah, that was the nearest I got to a tan. I can never compete with yours.
Of course, it's just a thing you have to do if you're from Newcastle. You have to wear fake tan, Samuel. And Samuel was at Blackpool and you are Alton Towers at the weekend, Tyrone.
I was, yes, a weekend at CBeebies Land. Very interesting and enjoyable weekend.
I'm sure you wouldn't have spent your Saturday any other way.
No, exactly. I was just talking to you about the Saturday night trip that was sitting in a Postman Pat decorated room watching England in the Rugby World Cup. Actually, I didn't see the football, but yeah, it was quite a strange experience sitting there with a pint taken from the bar with Postman Pat just above the bed, and we went on the Postman Pat ride 5 times over the weekend. So yeah,
this is what international weeks do to parents.
Sends people insane.
I'm still just coming down from the adrenaline of that. So yeah,
I'm surprised you can string a sentence together this afternoon. So I'm impressed by that. Anyways, football and matters. Let's just get straight into it. Big story on Sunday afternoon, Samuel. Obviously, you were on holiday. I was on the desk. Antony's return to training has been delayed until further notice, was the exact terminology used. The club obviously believe that reflects how serious they're taking these allegations, which me and Tyrone discussed at length on Friday. It was probably the right decision, wasn't it, to delay this return to training? It
was going that way, and they possibly could have made that decision 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago even. I think Antony addressed those allegations firstly in June. He put something on his Instagram account. But there was a precedent that was set with the Mason Greenwood situation, which was obviously extremely serious and also quite unique in that the allegations came into the public domain. And of course, Greenwood was arrested. Antony hasn't been arrested. We should stress that. He is under investigation by GMP. There was almost morbid curiosity from my behalf, just like having a look in at what was going on last week, because it did feel like United were trying to dodge the issue or stick their heads in the sand and hope that when they brought them back up that the situation would have cleared up and it would have gone away, and it was never going to go away. Antony did his own interview in Brazil as well, where he gave his version of events. But when there's a Greater Manchester police investigation ongoing, you've got to treat that seriously, and it's the sensible decision, it's the wise decision. It was also about time that United put in a statement condemning violence, domestic violence, violence against women. There was, on the deadline day when they communicated that Mason Greenwood was going to Getafe, the last paragraph in their, in their explanation for that, almost depicted Greenwood as a victim, which I still can't quite understand. If there was a victim in that whole situation, it was the alleged victim, as we all know. And really, with Antony, it had to be done. But again, I asked Ten Hag about this, about the allegations against Antony at a press conference. It was prior to the Forest game, and the answer he gave alarmed me. And I checked with Freddie Caldeira, who we all know is a Brazilian journalist and has been living and working in Manchester for a number of years, and just checked with him, is this the case? I'm pretty sure it's not the case. And he said, no, the case in Brazil is ongoing. I was staggered that nobody at United heard the alarm bells blaring at that point, and at the end of the press conference didn't gather the journalists there and say, look, I accept what the manager said there was inaccurate, because it was inaccurate. It wasn't legally publishable either. And they could have got on top of the situation at that point. But the actual answer appeared in the press conference video on the club website and on the club app, which again, I was staggered by. It should have been removed from it, and they have done that before. At times, there was a question centred on a player a number of years ago who was about to appear in court, not a United player, but the answer that Jose Mourinho gave at the time, you could not publish that whatsoever. And it was actually, I think it was actually one of the journalists who informed United, look, you can't have this in. It wasn't United's legal head kicking in, and I just don't quite understand how United are operating at times with really, really serious matters. And similar to this Greenwood situation, they have eventually made the right decision with Antony with this leave of absence until the GMP take the next step, and there's possibly more to come in Brazil as well. But the way they've gone about it, it still poses an awful lot of questions. At the moment, it feels quite a rudderless club, unfortunately.
The Mason Greenwood situation was just not handled well. That's an absolute fact. It was hoped that lessons would be learned from that situation going forward. As Samuel just said, the way the club would handle future situations like that. Are they becoming slow learners? Have they been too slow yet? Or what do you think their handling of this situation? Because it's been very sensitive and delicate, hasn't it? There's been allegations made in summer and obviously fresh allegations that came out last week. What have you made of their handling, I guess, of the last few days?
Yeah, I think it's taken them a while to get their ducks in a row. I mean, it's a difficult one. The way they've handled it and what Samuel said about the manager's answer in a press conference, it has been a case of just hoping it goes away, I think. These allegations have been around for months, really. This isn't, it's gathered steam in international break because one of the alleged victims gave an interview, and there was the UOL investigation, and other women have come forward since. But the initial allegations have been around and known for a long time, for 2 or 3 months now. And even initially, United felt it was something that was just gaining traction in Brazil and wasn't to be taken that seriously. I asked them about it, and the view was that it was barely gaining any traction in England, which told you everything about how reliable it was. But that's obviously not the case. It has given the impression of they just hope it goes away. It hasn't gone away. These aren't easy cases to handle, to be fair. I mean, Antony hasn't been arrested. He hasn't been charged with anything. We all know there's players currently and in the past who have played in the Premier League who have been arrested and who have been charged previously. So it's a difficult situation because this is happening in the public. There's other cases that have happened away from the public eye where players have been able to continue playing because their name's not in the public domain. So it's a difficult one for United, and they might feel hard done to in a sense because of that. But when there's 3 complainants now, it's probably the right thing to do. The difficulty, I guess, when you take this action is that what comes next? How do you now bring him back into the fold? Obviously, if he's arrested or charged, especially if he's charged, it becomes very simple. If not, when does this end? Are you now waiting for the investigation to come to a conclusion? That could be months. Could be months and months. Could be, almost the rest of the season potentially. So it's a difficult one to know what comes next now. I think that they've reached the right decision. I think they had to reach the right decision, especially after what happened with Greenwood. I think they've got there in the end. But it is, what comes next is the next question. But like you say, the handling of things, the way they kind of, there's no doubt they didn't take it seriously when it was first mentioned in the Brazilian press. I think it was in June. They did not take it seriously. The fact they thought it was done and dusted a few weeks ago shows they still weren't taking it seriously. They've had to take it seriously now. They've probably come to the right conclusion. I think we all agree they've come to the right conclusion. And now they'll just want a swift resolution, I guess, in some way, shape or form. But the fact that there's an investigation in Manchester, an investigation in Sao Paulo, it could drag on and on, I guess, from this position.
I think we started last week's podcast with Antony and went on to Jadon Sancho, because there's just been 2 massive stories in the last 2 weeks. So we'll just do it again. We'll just repeat ourselves and do it again. We'll move on to Sancho. And a man reporting for work usually isn't a story, Samuel. We've all done it today. But it certainly was yesterday when Sancho comes into the Carrington after his time off, the international break. Understood, obviously, to have some talks with Ten Hag. Me and Tyrone kind of got into what we expected to happen this week and consequences for Sancho. So would you like to add your opinion on that, and how do you think that's going to develop this week ahead of Brighton? Because I think importantly, that tweet is still pinned on his social media.
That is pretty staggering. I was told that there was whispers, I think, back in February about, I hate the phrase, but a PR guru who was starting to work with Sancho, and it's been suggested that relationship is now quite firm, even though it's not in the public domain yet. If he has indeed chosen this PR guru as his advisor, then it's probably a worse performance than any of these training performances that have reputedly unimpressed Ten Hag. And it would also account for the tweet being pinned. I mean, sometimes with footballers, and I don't mean this as a slight on them either, where they don't, have normal education that we do, they're not going to always be grammatically correct when they put a statement out, or you can tell that it's been done by a PR advisor or someone who's handling their communications. And that did strike me as something that had been handled by his comms, even though there was still a grammatical error in it. But it is the wrong way of going about it. However way you look at it, I mean, he's someone who has underperformed for United near consistently for 2 years, and he's accused the manager of lying, essentially. He said what he said was untrue. And there's no point getting into the minutiae of, like, if it went to court or something like that, where he could say, well, I wasn't referring to that, I was referring to what people are reading, and that he could say, I wasn't referring to Ten Hag there, which would be ludicrous. We know that he was referring to what Ten Hag had said. It was just a strange phraseology of it. But he really shouldn't have a leg to stand on. And I mean, I listened to your discussion last week, and it was telling that United weren't knocking back the possibility of him being sold to Saudi Arabia. I wrote back in September that, sorry, not September, we're in September now, but in April, that Ten Hag was becoming impatient with Sancho. And I made editorially, we made the conscious decision not to pin it on him as the top line, because you are conscious sometimes of scapegoating a player, ironically. Now, Sancho has used that word. I don't think anybody has scapegoated him. As Rich said on our train journey back from Arsenal, he said, if anything, there's been this concerted and encouraging attempt to big him up, to try and get his confidence
You
up.
used that word at Borussia Dortmund, when he had a bit of a fallout as well. There's an old statement from, got thrown on Twitter, and he uses the word scapegoat again, just interestingly enough. Right. So I just thought that was an interesting aspect when I saw that.
But he did okay in pre-season, and I think people were trying to say, yeah, he's looking all right as a false nine, just in the hope that he actually got a run out there. And it's on Ten Hag that in the 4 games United have played this season, he's picked the wrong striker in every one. And Sancho should have started at least one of those games. The Forest one was the obvious one to bring him in. And you can understand he'll look at Antony playing like a drain and be unhappy that he kept on getting selected on sporting grounds, and also arguably the moral grounds as well, given the investigations. And he's also bound to be disgruntled that Marshall doesn't have a kick across pre-season. As soon as he's deemed match fit, he comes in, and it's Tony Marshall scoreless again, as we expect every time he plays. But as I think it was Chris Sutton who said last week, he said, whatever happened to knocking on the manager's door? And that's what he had to do. And it's a generational thing. Players, they can't go off to a newspaper and shoot their mouth off. They can get their message across in a split second just through social media. But for him to have the brass neck to do it, I just thought... Also, I don't think it's reflective of him. When you speak to people at United, what they say about him, they say how he's a good kid. He's very generous with his time with fans outside Carrington, staff like him. I go back to when we were at Leicester last season and observing him in the mix zone as Ty was speaking to him and other journalists, and at the end of it, you shook all the journalists' hands and by the hand, and also the cameraman. And the cameraman there clearly looked like someone who is accustomed to footballers not acknowledging his existence. Here was a footballer acknowledging his existence. So I can imagine there's an element of him being frustrated. I can also imagine that maybe a PR advisor has got their claws stuck into him and run with this. But ultimately, it was on his account that statement was posted. It was a daft thing to do. And I think one way or another, this has to be his last season at United. Unless somehow his form takes off and he becomes the player he was at Dortmund, who got into the England squad at the age of 18 or 19, I think it was, when he made his debut against Croatia 5 years ago nearly. I think back then you wouldn't have imagined him to be on, I think he's on 23 caps at the moment, which is a pretty meagre amount for someone who looked such a talent at City and at Dortmund. But at United, I think bar a 6-week period under Ralf Rangnick, he's been poor. And the other thing, there's been this suggestion over the last week, it was an interesting story by Sammy Mockball about whether Ten Hag had breached confidentiality by referring to a mental issue. It's very, very dangerous to conflate a mental issue with mental health, which I think has been the suggestion. You talk about has someone got the mental wherewithal to deal with a job? I've seen colleagues here before your time who didn't have the mental wherewithal to be a journalist. They go into another industry. You've seen with a lot of players at Man United, they have not got the mental resilience to cope with the pressures of playing for Man United. And I'd say Sancho is one of them. And Ten Hag has not once said it was a mental health issue. I certainly don't think, given the amount of time he was off last year, which was, I think he went 102 days without playing. He was away for 3 months. Nobody specified an injury. It was clear that it was to get himself into better physical shape, and that there were maybe some mental issues as well, as Ten Hag alluded to. But also when he came back, they're suggesting that he was annoyed by that. When he came back, he played quite well. He got an equaliser against Leeds. He was a game changer against Leicester. He started against Barcelona, winners' medal. That was all in the space of the first few weeks when he came back. And also, in his first season, he missed a couple of games due to a family bereavement in, I think it was January. There was that strange international break that month as well for teams in South America. And when he came back, that is by far and away the best run of form he's had for United. So it's actually, when he's been given time off by United, and United have been good with him, he's come back and he's done well. So that just doesn't stack up. This whole thing that, Ten Hag really shouldn't have said that about him. Sancho wasn't complaining about it. You look at the footage of him getting ready to come on against Forest. He's stood next to Ten Hag smiling. Yeah. So look, there has to be one winner in this battle. I'm sure United will do their utmost to avoid the use of the word battle, but Ten Hag can't back down over this. He's seen off Ronaldo. He's seen off De Gea. Jadon Sancho is small fry to him.
Going back to the point you made earlier about Chris Sutton. If Chris Sutton is the voice of reason, we're in dangerous territory.
Well, I did hesitate, I think, when I was saying that.
I didn't expect that on today's podcast, I tell you. Just to wrap up this segment then, Ty, the final word on Sancho. Samuel's hit it on the nail there with those comments, but hit it on the nail, hit the head on the nail.
Hit the nail on the head.
On the head. What a mess. It's actually vodka down there, not water. But as long as he has this tweet up, we said earlier last week, it's an act of defiance, isn't it? And surely, coming into this Brighton game at Old Trafford, 3 p.m. kickoff, he's not going to be in that squad, surely, if that tweet remains up.
I mean, you'd be amazed if he was in the squad, yeah. I mean, I guess the nature of those talks between the two could have changed, given what's happened to Antony. I don't think Ten Hag will let that come into it. But, it's a sign of where his head is at and what his views are. And we know that, on the Monday after the Ten Hag's comments, he was... we gave United the chance to correct the record or to add anything, and it was simply nothing else to say. The manager gave a clear explanation as to why he wasn't selected. Ten Hag was sticking by his view, and Sancho is clearly sticking by his view. He's not forgotten that post is pinned to the top of his social media profile. I'm sure his agent or someone in his camp would have said, that's still pinned to the top of your profile. Do you want to change it? He hasn't done. It's over a week now. That is a clear decision that I am leaving this here. This is still my view. I haven't changed my opinion. And Ten Hag hasn't changed his opinion. So quite what happens from that meeting and how they move forward, I don't know, because neither man seems to want to back down. And unless Sancho does back down, he's got problems. I mean, really, he should be looking at this and thinking, right, maybe this is a time to just, eat it up, accept the manager's view that I've not been training well enough, even if I disagree, because there's a spot there on the right wing to be had for maybe a few months, and that should be his opportunity to play a run of 15, 20 games and show what he can do. He might prefer to play on the left, but we know he can play on the right. It should be seen as an opportunity, but I don't think it will be at the moment. Whereas really, he should probably be the one saying, right, I'll unpin it now, and I'll go into that meeting with a bit of contrition, heat of the moment stuff, that sort of approach, and look at that spot on the right wing where Antony's now unavailable and think, I'll have that. This is my opportunity. But his social media profile at the moment suggests that's not the place he's in.
I mean, I completely agree. Sometimes you just got to play the game, don't you? Swallow your pride, apologise, even if you think you're not.
Even if you're apologising with your fingers crossed under the desk,
just do it.
Just do it.
It's the sensible thing. If you're an adult, you're mature. He's 23 years old. Take some responsibility. Move on. There you go. That's therapy, isn't it? That's a therapy session. Anyways, that'll be it for part 1. We'll be back in a moment for part 2. Welcome back to part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, if you listened to Friday's episode, you might have heard me and Tyrone discussing his new profile picture on Twitter, and I believe our podcast producer Seb inserted a picture on YouTube to show the listeners what it looked like. So, if you haven't saw it, Seb has just went and placed the photo on my left in a nice little frame. Samuel, what do you think of that? Had to give it a mention before we continued with the footballing matters.
It's a worthy final shot in New Jersey to the final. In fact, I'm straying into spoiler territory there for The Sopranos. I know you started watching The Sopranos.
I finished The Sopranos. I finished this.
That could have been the final shot of it instead, couldn't it?
What song is it again? When in the
Don't Stop Believing.
It's my ringtone actually. So we'll move on back to the more important footballing matters. Samuel, you wrote the line today that United won 4 key signings next summer. Some of the names were so linked.
Could be more the way it's going.
Definitely could be more. I think they need more. A few of the names obviously were so linked to the club this summer. There was interest in Jeremy Frimpong from Bayer Leverkusen, for example. So could you just expand on that line, please, to start this section and tell her a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, defensively, they've had a dreadful start to the season already, but so much is going to change between now and then. And with the fullback situation, you could see them actually saying, right, instead of having a right back, we'll have a left back. I mean, that's quite fluid. Wan-Bissaka's had a good year, but they're still in this quandary in that he'll have a year left of his contract, I think, in the summer, is it? Or it's the option, isn't it? He's actually entered the last year of his contract. Sometimes you can lose track of time with the +1 option. And you'd still say there's a case to be made that unless he becomes half the attacking fullback that Trent Alexander-Arnold is, that you just say, look, let's cut our losses here. He's picked up a bit of form. There's some resale value. Most clubs in the Premier League will want him, sell him, get a right back in that the manager wants. And Ten Hag is very much... That squad is very much in his image. It's his players. I mean, the McTominay situation is a classic case for it. He's given some very withering responses on McTominay without... One question was on McTominay. He gave a cursory answer, and then he started rhapsodising about Kobbie Mainoo, who's a very good young midfielder, but he's also injured. And when he was asked about Amrabat after the Arsenal game, he spoke about, I think the word he used was compromises with certain midfielders, i.e. Scott McTominay, because he doesn't see him as a defensive midfielder. And so I think you can apply that to other areas of the squad. I mean, Malasia's injured. He's also not been a particularly good signing, bar a purple patch at the start. What's going to happen there? You could easily see a scenario where, come the end of the season, they're in a situation similar to the end of the 21-22 season, where you thought, well, they need a right back and a left back, but they're not going to get both. So in the end, they went with a left back because it was Ten Hag say so. But Frimpong is also of particular interest because next summer he is due to have a year left in his contract. And that is something that United are looking at a lot more closely with players. They obviously signed Mason Mount. They signed Amrabat. I know Fiorentina have got that extension option, which protects his resale value, and it would ensure that they would get a permanent fee for him if United take up their option to sign him, which I think is of 25 million euros. And then in terms of the centre-half situation, they're absolutely going to need one next year because Varane is brittle, Maguire is not wanted, and eventually will have to leave. you looking ahead to Saturday's game, United have conceded 7 goals in 4 Premier League games. They've had 3 centre-halves get injured or unwell. And we all know against Brighton on Saturday, Maguire will not start. It will be Lindelof and Martinez. It would be amazing if Maguire somehow started that game. And unfortunately for Harry Maguire, he comes on at 1-1 against Arsenal. United end up losing 3-1. He's just going to have to face it. He's going to have to leave United at some point, sooner rather than later. And they will want an athletic, imposing centre-half to come in. Because with Varane, he's been very good, I think, by and large, under Ten Hag. But he's going to be 31 next year, and he does miss an awful lot of games. And when he's missing, United do tend to feel that they tend to feel it, and they've conceded 5 goals in the 2 games that he's not played, which also speaks volumes. There used to be this run in his first season where whenever United got thrashed, he wasn't playing. And then I think it was the Brighton one, which was probably the worst of the lot that season, where they got thumped 4-0 and he was very much front and centre of that. Midfield, of course, with McTominay, I mean, the beginning of the end has started there, so they'll have leverage to bring someone in. And with Van der Beek, whenever he does go, he is going to go. So there's going to be room that they have to fill there. And of course, up front, there's just so much uncertainty over a number of forwards' futures at the moment that, and we already knew that Ten Hag wanted ideally another forward to come in. That always seemed unrealistic in the summer, but they'll have more leverage to do that next year. I wouldn't necessarily say, although, I mean, the story did mention Evan Ferguson, but I think if you're a top club and you're not looking at Evan Ferguson, you're doing something wrong. I mean, City are making it work with Alvarez and Haaland, and I think we all thought that it would always be Haaland with Alvarez playing back up until Haaland decided he wanted to move to Madrid. But Guardiola's such a great coach, he's able to accommodate both of them. It would be it'd be fascinating to see if United could manage to accommodate Evan Ferguson and Rasmus Højlund, but the main investment is in Højlund, so I think that they will be on the lookout for a more certainly Gakpo was of interest last season. Someone of that profile, not necessarily Dutch. I mean, I think it's probably advisable that United don't always go for a Dutch player or someone who...
have to get some Dutch decorations and Netherlands flags.
You could do the bingo checklist. And
be more appropriate, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Of who's... I mean, even Amrabat's represented by Keys Voss now, very convenient. But they are going to need a forward next year because Greenwood's out of the picture, Antony's out of the picture at the moment, Ahmad is injured. As Ty said before, you could see Ahmad being sold at some point just because he's never really, him and Ten Hag, maybe then destined to never hit it off for one reason or another. Does Facundo Pellistri ever get a meaningful start? Does Jadon Sancho play for United again? Do you release Antony Marshall next year? At the moment, you'd have to say you would. So that's 5 forwards. That's probably the majority of the forwards they've got. So it has to be one forward at the very minimum. But as I said, this is a provisional plan, and it's subject to change, and it could change quite a lot the way they've started.
Could you imagine Rasmus Højlund and Evan Ferguson up front together? Physicality. If you were a defender, you wouldn't leave the dressing room, would you? You'd be...
No, but it's not the 1990s.
4-4-2.
That would be the way, yeah. Make Man United great again by go back to the 90s formation.
Yeah, Ten Hag's going to get one of those caps, isn't he, on the side? Big red cap for the sideline. Where do you stand on the right-back debate then, Ty? Obviously, Samuel kind of mentioned it there. Wan-Bissaka, he's in his last year of his deal. There's obviously the option to extend that, which the club probably will. I think they're in talks over a new contract, because we love talking about contracts on this podcast, don't we, Samuel? But obviously, Wan-Bissaka, he's enjoyed such a renaissance over the last 6 months. He was, 9 months, God, it's September now. It's not the summer anymore. But he was out of the team, in the cold. He comes back in after the World Cup. His form was brilliant. All of a sudden, Diego Dallo stops playing. Wan-Bissaka starts, has a run of games. I felt it was significant that he started the games at Wembley against Brighton and again the FA Cup final as well. And I thought that was really a statement that he was first choice. And then we're coming to the season. Wan-Bissaka started again, as in each game. So for all his progress, though, how do you feel about him? Because, I mean, me and Samuel had this debate, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, where I said, look, I think he's been fantastic at his improvement, but I've still got niggling doubts over long term, whether he's a top elite right back to take you to the next level. So would you agree with that point?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think you'll be happy to have him as a squad player, as your number 2 right back. I think it's...
So where does that leave Diego Dallo? It's a conundrum, isn't it?
I think you probably need to sell one of them and buy a clear number 1. I mean, it's the closest selection battle in the United squad, but it's not because both are brilliant. It's because both are okay. It's not at that level. It's at that level when probably you need someone at that level. That's good on video. If you're listening, you'll have to imagine what I did then.
The height of the ceiling.
We've said a lot of things in this podcast that I presume the majority of the listeners listen on audio platforms. On YouTube. And we're looking a bit daft, I think.
So I think, who you sell, wouldn't either, basically. I think you sell either and you sign a right back. For me, that's maybe the biggest priority this coming summer. It is a right back. That looks the weakest area of the squad. But, Samuel mentioned the 4 signings there. You're talking another probably £200 million summer. I mean, Ten Hag's going to have to earn that investment again, because you look at what he signed already, and I know there's always this view, we've been through players there who haven't worked, but this club has spent a fortune over the years, and all right, a lot of the players haven't worked, but at some point, a manager's going to have to make them work. And Ten Hag already has signed a goalkeeper, a centre-back, a left-back, 4 central midfielders, a right winger and a centre forward.
£400 million.
Half a team, £400 million over 2 years. There can't be any excuses this year of I haven't got my own right back. And then
he ends a game with Claude Puel's first choice centre half pair in Leicester 5 years ago.
You've got to make it work, and for that investment, you need to keep pushing it forward. And maybe the signings you made last year were very good. The fact they finished 3rd was impressive, but you've got to match that this year. And if they don't match that this year, then there's no guarantee you get that money to spend at some point. They're going to have to have somewhere where they don't spend £200 million. We know how tight they are with FFP. Eventually, City and Liverpool had years of big investment and then quiet years where they spent very little because the squad was there and in place. And, maybe United squad isn't quite in place yet. There's room for improvement. Like, say, a right back next summer looks the obvious one to me. Maybe if you get rid of Martial, you want another number 9. I think you're looking at someone, not in Evan Ferguson's price range, let's put it that way. You're looking at a £40 million striker, maybe, who's happy to play second fiddle to Højlund, presuming Højlund does the business this year.
Out Weghorst?
About Weghorst type. Scored again, yeah.
Maybe Manchester United with the problem, not Weghorst, I think.
Weghorst and McTominay are absolutely banging the goals in international level.
So is Højlund, to be fair to him. So is Højlund.
So I don't know if they'll need as many as 4. I don't know if he'll get as many as 4. Because like I say, that's a lot of signings already he's made. That's half a squad, really, when you go through it. Half a team, half a starting 11. And this year, it's very early days. We've all spoken about the issues we're seeing within the team that I'm sure Ten Hag is seeing within the team as well. And if they recover to finish 3rd again, top 4 again, then maybe they push the button and invest again. But if they finish 5th, then there's no way he'll get that sort of money to spend. It's going to be interesting to see how the season develops, because that top 4 race looks really tight this year. And if Ten Hag wants the kind of money that he clearly desires every summer, certainly at the moment while he's building this squad, we know how hard he pushes his sporting directors. We've mentioned recently his relationship with Mark Overmars, and when he backed him over Mark Overmars' unwanted text messages, so we say at Ajax, those two have been on a really good relationship, because basically Overmars gave Ten Hag what he wanted. Ajax's 2 most expensive transfer windows in the history were under Ten Hag. He got the money he wanted. I think he's got a pretty decent relationship with John Murtough, because he gets the money and the players he wants. But to keep that happening, they're going to have to finish in the top 4 again.
They're going to need another striker, though, aren't they, surely? I mean, next summer. You've got Anthony Martial, who's now in the last year of his contract. Finally he's going to leave the club. What's that, 9 years? Will it be in the summer or around that?
I think he's into his 9th season.
I looked at the encyclopedia there for a reason. I knew he'd confirm for his. But Rasmus Højlund, we've talked about the pressure on his shoulders already. He's such a young lad. He's raw, and it's going to take time for him to adapt to the Premier League. And he's rightly going to be given that time. But if he can't just be the only striker, I know Rashford can play there too, but he's not an out-and-out centre forward. So next summer they're going to have to sign a striker on. And if Tyrone says possibly more of a 40 million striker instead of another big outlay.
Or you sign a versatile forward.
Someone who can play across the front line. But does anyone come into your head? I mean, the market's so difficult at the moment. I thought that in the summer. Does anyone pop into either of your heads when you think about it?
If you're to be pedantic about it, you'd probably say goal scorer, because although the number 9 is back on vogue again. It's still quite a specialist, as United discovered in the summer. It's such a specialist role that you're either making a compromise and signing Højlund for still quite a substantial fee, but in their own in people's words at United, his gamble is rough diamond, or you're paying top dollar for a player who is probably unattainable. And those two players were the two certainties, I think, in Kane and Osimhen. United decided very early on not to go close to Kane, and we've covered that chapter and verse. It passed me by clearly on deadline day, but obviously Randall Kolo and Wani went to PSG as well, and that was 95 million euros, which was roughly what United were being quoted for him, and that's why they didn't go for him and went for Højlund. And Wani's profile would have been more suited to the Premier League. I think his goal scoring record, his age, playing in a very good France team, playing the World Cup final, playing in the Bundesliga as well, which is probably it's the league that prepares players best for the Premier League, I'd argue. But in terms of next year, I think the pool, I mean, we were told on tour, there are 1,800 forwards out there. It's one of these quotes that's not quite, I know it's not.
Am I on that list as well? Like, does the scouting go that?
1,801, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's not got the traction of the 804 right backs 4 years ago, but that was what we were told. Like, when I heard that, I thought, this has got to rival the 804 right backs, but it hasn't really. It's not really getting used as a stick to beat United with. And in fairness, with Højlund, what I saw at Arsenal, I was very impressed by. And I think the interview he did with Patrick Davison of Sky Sports for their pre-match coverage, he came across really well. Seems like a really good character, ready to work. He put himself about in that game. It'd be good if United actually, didn't keep him at arm's length and allowed those who cover the club frequently speak to him, and so we can gauge more from his character, and it helps. And when we were on tour, we were given some really good quotes on him that we were then told we couldn't use, which boggled the mind. And then there was we were told that they didn't want to big him up too much, and then Ten Hag went on MUTV and said he's the striker the players have been waiting for. So, but I think in terms of communications issues at Manchester United, that's been the least of their worries over the last 6 weeks or so.
I think, sorry, we're just going to say, talking about strikers and the next forward this time, when you look at their United rivals, top 6 rivals, say, it's maybe only Arsenal who actually have 2 strikers as such in Jesus and Nketiah. And even Jesus can play on the right. And I saw you fluttering your eyelashes there, Stephen. And I was thinking, do I include Newcastle in this? But I think, we're not really looking at teams in the relegation zone, facing a relegation battle.
Is Isaac really a striker, though? He's a brilliant forward, but he seems like one who can play across.
He can play on the left.
Rather than out and out.
It's so interesting that debate has been happening over the last 6 months, 8 months, because he gets involved with link-up play. He is a number 9. Yeah. He is, and he's excellent at being a number 9 as well. But I think when he first came to England, people were looking at him, as you say, look at the way he moves. He's so effortless. He kind of glides, doesn't he? He's like Omri-esque, but he's definitely a number 9. Definitely.
Yeah, I think so. But you look at like Tottenham, probably Richarlison and Son, their 2 centre forwards can both play wide. Liverpool, all their forwards can play everywhere, basically. City have got Haaland and Alvarez. Guardiola doesn't like using Alvarez wide, but he's found this attacking midfield role for him. So the second, at least the second forward, if not the first, in all of those squads can play wide. So that's probably what United need. Højlund, you look at Højlund, I don't see him playing on the wing. You look at Evan Ferguson, I don't see him playing anywhere but the penalty box. They're 2 players who just would not, one's a backup to the other. It doesn't work for me when one's 19 and one's 21. What you'd need is someone who can play on the right or on the left as well as centrally, and it just gives you more options. Like, Samuel mentioned Gakpo before, he's probably ideal for that sort of role. He's played the number 9 at Liverpool. He played off the left for PSG.
Is he one who got away? I'm not sure you could quite say that.
I'm not sure you'd say he's that.
No. I think he's a decent player, but I don't think he's what United needed.
He's the right, positionally, he's the right profile. I think if they'd have signed him next summer, you'd probably say he's an ideal backup. But I don't think he's good enough to say he's one that got away.
Going back to Højlund being likeable, I presume you both saw the clip of him after the Denmark game with the microphone.
I heard about
I think
this,
going to the Euros, he shouted down the microphone. Did either of you have a fiery speech like that either at your weddings, or were the best man speeches a bit more disappointing? Because that got me stirred up. That did.
Yeah.
Going to buy a Denmark top.
I don't recall.
No. I think the closest probably is on the occasional WhatsApp group over something United related with other colleagues. That's happened once or twice recently, but I'm not putting my hands up on that one. It's maybe others who've done the shouting.
We'll leave it there for part 2, gents. We'll be back in a moment for part 3. Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, I got a tweet on, it was either Friday or Saturday, off a listener from the podcast, and he said, "Thank you, Steven, for not discussing international football." He said, "I absolutely hate it. It's a load of rubbish." So what we're going to do right now...
Samuel was listening while he was off then.
We're going to discuss international football very, very quickly because it's the end of the podcast, but we'll go over this segment. Tyrone, you wanted to talk about Scott McTominay. It's all your fault. You had an urge, didn't you?
I mean, wanted is a big word.
He's been fantastic for Scotland, though, in all seriousness.
Yeah.
He really has, and he's joint top goal scorer in the Euro qualifying at the moment with 6 goals with Hoyland. I think Lukaku as well, actually. So a lot of United links to my international knowledge.
Benny McCarthy taking a lot of credit there. Yeah.
Weghorst must have 4 or 5.
But he's playing in this a bit more advanced position, isn't he? He's playing as a number 8, and he gets this license to run forward. His timing is runs late into the box. Dare I say, like Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard did back in the day? Can I make that comparison?
I think we can airbrush that on the podcast.
But in terms of what this means for United, his performances, Tyrone, you made the very sensible point that it is good news for the club because it is bound to increase his resale value, isn't it? If there's going to be clubs interested, but so West Ham interested. If he's doing excellent for Scotland, that can only help the club potentially shift them in the future.
Yeah, it's going to keep his value for sure. I think we're probably both expecting Maguire and McTominay to go next year. I think we're probably expecting at least one of them to go this year. They're not going to play an awful lot for the club this year. So if they're playing for their countries and playing well, then at least it's giving them a platform to impress potential suitors. McTominay, you've seen what he's doing. I mean, he's been an absolute monster for Scotland. To be fair, he's been fantastic. 6 goals in 5 games. Maguire's still playing for England, and deservedly so, I think. I know he gets a lot of criticism, but he is very reliable for England. There's a lot of young centre-halves there who are pushing for that role, but none of them have got the experience that Maguire's got, and obviously you only get that one way, but playing Mark Guay and Fikayo Tomori maybe is a step too far, I think. I think Maguire's probably got a fight on his hands to keep his place for the Euros, but I don't think it's guaranteed he loses it. If he goes to the Euros and has the same kind of tournament he did 2 years ago, then United would probably get reasonable money for him next year because he was genuinely world class.
Real Madrid will be calling
2021, exactly. Yeah. Ten Hag, we having him back. So it is good to keep them in the shop window. Like I say, McTominay has been superb for Scotland. I mean, they are qualifying. Half of Europe qualifies for the Euros these days, so there's not much jeopardy in those groups, but Scotland are top of a group, including Spain. It's an incredible effort, really. And McTominay has been their star man. I think there's always this debate about what his best role is. And, he played as a centre forward at times in the academy. I don't think he's a natural holding midfielder. I thought we did last this phrase, but going back to McFred, it always felt like they had to play as 2 holding midfielders because together they were like 1 holding midfielder, basically. They weren't good enough to do that role on their own. McTominay is better in this role we're seeing for Scotland, where he's box to box, he can get forward. We've occasionally seen it at United. The Leeds games at Old Trafford spring to mind, where he would get forward and time those runs into the box. And, against Bielsa's Leeds, where it was man-to-man marking, Solskjaer used him in quite an intelligent way to just run past your marker, basically, because we've seen that's what he can do. He's quite a powerful runner, like you mentioned before. And he did that really well against Leeds, getting into the box and scoring, and that's what he's doing for Scotland. His goals aren't 25-yarders from distance. They're quite close-range finishes, and he's really getting into the box and creating chances and taking chances. And that role's probably not available to him, really. I mentioned before that Ten Hag signed 4 midfielders now. Kobe Mainoo's coming through. I think McTominay's going to find it hard to really play that much this season. But what he's doing for Scotland is probably going to mean United can still get decent money for him next season. He doesn't become kind of a forgotten midfielder where he has a nothing year at United, plays a dozen games, and his value plummets. At least it's going to stay high if he can maintain this. And Scotland look a certainty now to be at the Euros, so he'll get that platform there as well.
My mum's Scottish, so hopefully she doesn't listen to this podcast.
So you're close enough. You must have some Scottish blood.
I'm technically half Scottish, I suppose, if you look at it that way. But
eligible to play for Scotland.
Well, I actually played for Scotland youth system growing up. Samuel, just to clarify, do you reckon Solskjaer's got a photo of Freddie McTominay in his house across Norway?
Heady days, weren't they?
I presume neither of you are surprised that he's yet to return to management. I know there's some quotes recently flying around. He was asked whether he would return. He was linked to a women's team as well. Does that shock either Samuel Luckhurst or Tyrone Marshall?
I think that probably does him a disservice. I mean, I don't think he was as good a United manager as some said. I don't think he was as bad as some said either. He exceeded expectations to last as long as he did, but it is quite telling that it was nearly 2 years ago that he was sacked now, and it doesn't seem like there's ever been a tangible offer that has come close to tempting him back into the game. I think it was it Club Brugge last season. I mean, if you're not getting that job when Scott Parker did get that job, then it feels like his card has been unfairly marked when he probably does deserve a crack at the whip at a club where he has no ties whatsoever. But I think everyone just associates him with United, and rightly or wrongly that might be prohibitive for him. It clearly has been prohibitive for him for quite some time now. I mean, as I said, it's the best part of 2 years since he was sacked, and there's maybe been the odd Premier League job where you'd have thought he'd have done had a better go at it than the guy who got the role. But it's not like there's been a job out there where you thought, that must absolutely go to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer.
The obvious one, this is the international selection, is the Norway job that he looks ideal for. I know, is it Stanley Solbakken and he's still there, man?
It was, but that was the thing. I remember.
You look at me, I'm not going to help with that.
Yeah, well, I don't know how they're doing in this qualifying section, but there's, they've clearly underperformed recently for a team that's got Haaland and Odegaard in it. Solskjaer must be next in line for that job. You'd think he's at least going to garner the respect of some of those players, and I think he's certainly competent enough to manage an international team. That
would be a romantic rekindling, wouldn't it? Solskjaer and Haaland. Star-crossed lovers were meant to be together, weren't they? They were meant to be together.
I surprised myself at Old Trafford the other week when I somehow recognised, I didn't know his name, but I recognised the Danish national team coach. But I said, is that the Danish national team coach? Even Simon Peach, who goes here, there and everywhere covering England, he didn't realise it was him.
I thought it was Jürgen Klinsmann.
You do surprise us whenever we're with Samuel at games. I mean, you know what the me type, but if there's anyone with any relevant role or some obscure club, Samuel will clock them across in the director's box usually. It's an impressive quality you've got.
Who was that?
I think it was Nottingham Forest's...
Oh, Alan Tate, yeah.
Instantly you realise the fair, and that was a story in itself though, wasn't it?
An easy story.
It was. Anyways, gents, we'll leave it there. We'll be back on Friday, I believe. Are you in on Friday, Samuel?
Yeah, I'll be at Carrington. Yeah.
I'm not. No, it's my best mate's 40th birthday, so I'll be.
It might be you and Rich then on later in the week. A nice treat for you, Samuel. Thank you very much for your time, Tyrone.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thanks, Samuel, as usual.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thanks to listeners. Again, as usual, head across to YouTube, as we've mentioned for this podcast, ticking over with the subscribers nicely, as I always say. And we're always available on Spotify, Apple, or your usual audio platforms. So have a fantastic week. We'll be back later on Friday. Take care.